Under the split in the retreating black cloud, the invisible scale of spring is oscillating in the fresh April sky. On the highest mountain, the god of snow, his dazzling head bent over the dizzy space of reflections, stars melting with desire in the vertical cataracts of the thaw, annihilating himself loudly among the excremental cries of minerals. Between the silences of moss towards the distant mirror of the lake in which, the veils of winter having disappeared, he has newly discovered the lightning flash of his faithful image.
The program you are about to hear is fiction, science fiction. We make no guarantees, however, how long it will remain fiction, fiction, fiction.
Self-saturation salutations to all you cognonauts out there, and welcome to another episode of Exofathom, the show that dares to explore the outside reaches of understanding. I am Nick, and I am joined with my two lovely co-hosts. Mike, how you doing?
Oh man, you know me. I'm hanging in there. I was slightly expecting a different rhyming salutation.
Okay.
But yeah, man, I'm hanging in there.
All right, very good. And we have Ayla here. How are you, Ayla?
I'm okay. Self-saturation salutations to you too. Tambien.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah. And thank you guys for listening. We really appreciate all of you. It's a very special episode for us. This is episode 100 of Exofathom. We are very excited to bring it to you. Technically, it's not episode 100 because we have exobits that probably would have pushed us up to maybe 120 or 130 by now. But as far as the long form conversations go, this is episode 100. And we are very excited to be here tonight. So thank you guys for listening. We very much appreciate all of you out there. Tonight, I wanted to get into the myth of Narcissus. And yeah, I think a lot of people are probably familiar with the idea of narcissists or Narcissus or the Narcissus flower. You don't know what that is? Oh my goodness.
Narcissist? I'm never heard anything about no memes.
Yeah, we don't know nothing about that. That's for sure.
Well, so if I had $1 every time I heard something about that story, I'd be broke.
Right. Yeah, well, you know, like I think all of us have heard this sort of myth and concept before, and I thought it was an interesting idea to sort of play around with. I really tried to formulate this episode based off of the myth, and then sort of getting a little bit into the occults and some of this philosophical ideas of rumination and reflection. What does it mean to look at yourself? What does it mean to reflect upon yourself? And are we sort of projecting our reflections out into the world? All of that and more on tonight's Exofathom, ladies and gentlemen. But before we get started, I want to ask them. What's that?
We're going to get a commercial break.
I know, seriously.
Like, what, we got ads? We have a sponsor.
Honestly, I would love to make commercials if we could do that. I would definitely cut them.
Is brought to you by your bro, Raid Shadow.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but we totally should have like random stuff that we sell and then do little commercials for it.
I was even thinking parody commercials would be fine too. That would be good.
Yeah,
I was imagining selling shitty stuff.
Yeah, you could make something up. Yeah, absolutely.
I can make some crap stuff. Let me tell you.
we need an infomercial for the cosmic egg. That's for sure. That would be really good. Like a slap chop, but cosmic egg.
Oh my god. I want to sell a cosmic egg. Like I'll conceive of one and then I will like put it in a box, and then when you open the box, you have you've unopened your new cosmic egg.
I don't know. There might need to be some laws around selling your cosmic eggs.
Fair enough. Well, so before we get started into sort of the bigger concept of this episode, I wanted to make my co-hosts especially uncomfortable with this first question, which is, what do you love about yourself the most?
Ooh.
Ah.
So I'm gonna go the full narcissist route and say I love how much I hate myself.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the thing that keeps pushing me forward in one aspect or another. Um, yeah, the basic idea is that if you can just bully yourself enough, you'll get things done. And I think that's the thing that has propelled me forward more so in my adult life.
Interesting. Yes, sort of the what would you even call that? Like reverse motivation or anti-motivation?
Yeah, negative
Like
reinforcement or
There you
something
go.
like that.
I like that. Negative reinforcement. That's it. Ayla, what about you? What do you love most about yourself?
Gosh, yeah, that's a hard question. Like right before you asked it, I looked at the text that we have and I'm
Good.
like, why? Honestly, lately, I think the thing I've been loving the most about myself is the ability to just really enjoy a moment. So, like the other day I went for a walk and I haven't been able to do that for many a month. And I took a minute and I thought to myself, wow, I'm walking, there's air, there's a sunset. Is that a bird? Oh, wow. To just really just root in the moment and be like, damn, I'm blissfully happy right now. I really like that ability. I think it's an ability because not many people, I definitely couldn't do that a while ago. Like it's hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, being in the moment is definitely difficult. Some people have an easier time about it than others, for sure. Yeah, I
Also,
thought
recovering adrenaline junkie too. It's like to go from skydiving and snowboarding, fucking double black diamonds to enjoying just a regular walk. It's a big transition.
right. Yeah, definitely have to sort of adjust your perspective on that one. That's for sure. I thought this was an interesting question just because I don't know how often we say these types of things about ourselves.
How did you answer that?
And yeah, that's something I had to actually give myself some thought and some rumination on, because I think why I wanted to introduce with this question is because I feel like there is sometimes I don't know if it's a stigma, but it's like kind of like a repellent or social repulsion to big up yourself or to compliment yourself.
Big up.
Yeah. I think like we perceive any sort of like adulation of the self as braggadocio or arrogance, and I don't think that that's always true, although it can be a lot of the time. So I thought it was kind of interesting to sort of think about it myself. And I think what I came up with, the thing I value the most is that about myself is that I still have a pretty active imagination. And maybe that's just because I was misinformed as a kid, thinking that like once you get older, you lose a lot of your imaginative energy. But I'm pretty satisfied with the fact that I can still sort of daydream and imagine things that are a little less rigid than my actual reality, that I haven't kind of succumbed to rigid thought structures. And
I like that.
yeah, and that, like I'm still open to possibility, which I think I really value in my sort of day-to-day life anyways. So I'm glad that I'm at least maintaining a little bit of consistency there about myself.
I love it. And I love how like weird we are, right? Because Mike is enjoying his like bullying of himself. I'm enjoying the ability to derive pleasure from the moment, and you're enjoying your ability to imagine. I just wouldn't expect those answers,
Yeah, I think it's a kind of an interesting question to ask people, because it's not a question you get a lot. And I don't know, why do you guys think that is, or am I wrong about that? Do you guys, I can see where, and maybe I'm jumping too quickly ahead, but I can see where in the age of like social media, we might think that we're doing that. but I don't know. Do you guys think that that's equivalent? Do you think that it's like social media persona is equivalent to like an understanding or an appreciation? Do you see those things as equivalent at all, or where's the distinction there in your guys' opinion, if there is any? I don't know.
Maybe if when you ask the question directly, you'll get deeper answers. I feel like a lot of social media, just the way our society is set up, it's all very shallow. It's all very external. Yeah, it's all like I did this, I went here, I have this thing, but it's not anything that is of a deeper nature. At least that's what social media rewards. The second you start going deeper, then you run into like cringe factors.
Right. Yeah, no, and thank you. I think that it helps parse out what I was trying to differentiate there. Certainly, because it does feel like there is a certain level of surface layer, not narcissism, but self-love. We'll call that, self-love. But I don't know, like you're saying, that the moment you dig deeper than that surface, you've kind of like inverted the whole idea, and the internet sort of treats you like a narcissus, like a person staring at their own reflection, falling in love. I think that's just such a weird phenomenon for me, because it's like, for as much as we like to talk about self-love and sort of like boosting your self-esteem and all of that stuff, we sure don't really like it when people do.
I think it's also too a hard thing to achieve with any real meaning, I guess, for lack of a better word, because for the most part the self-esteem thing centers around like positive vibes, bruh. Like everything has to be great, bruh. But I just keep saying bruh for
yeah, why are you hating on the surfers, man?
He's doing like the quintessential hippie thing, right? It's all good.
Yeah, but in reality, every moment isn't supposed to be good. If you're living your life completely happy all the time, you're just kind of stuck in a permanent high, like a perma high. So you have to learn to value the depths as well, and I think there's a lot of value in that today's society, and especially since the self-motivation thing in the 60s, doesn't really value. Everything has to be great. Everyone has to be happy.
So we're almost kind of not to jump ahead, but we're going to be touching all of this type of stuff. I think it's a good introductory, but it does seem like a kind of a skewed sort of sense of self, almost like we've said this before. It's the sort of avatar of the self, all of the good, none of the bad, like Mike just said. And I wonder. No, I guess I don't wonder. I think it makes total sense as to why that is. I just wonder if it will always be that way, or because it would seem to me that there's just this sort of like social revulsion to people who sort of navel gaze, or what is perceived to be navel gazing. So yeah, I'm just blathering on, but
no. Go for it. I think I'm still thinking about that last comment.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the only thing that comes to mind is sort of this idea of like for Instagram, for example, somebody setting up their profile, and then there's that little about sections, like 144 characters, and they're like, a lot of people will say, oh, well, I'll put a little plain, I travel a lot, put some makeup, I do makeup tutorial. I don't know. I mean, like the pressure to sort of like identify yourself in that little bio. I feel like there's two schools of people. There's one school where they're like, yeah, this is what I'm about. I've got my emojis down, or I've got my descriptors. This is how I am, and this is what defines me, and I love it about myself, and I want everybody to know. And then there's the other class of people who are just kind of like question mark, quote, heart emoji, like who just kind of skip it. And so I don't know what that has to do exactly, but that's what came to mind in this idea where it's like you can opt in to sort of wear on your sleeve your best traits, or you can sort of take a a more low profile approach.
Yeah. And I think that there's a real balancing act there, right? Because I think that the legend or the myth of Narcissus is probably useful and has been resonant for a reason, which is that we're speaking about this thing that we kind of, this repulsion thing that I'm talking about. Too much self-reflection, too much getting lost in your own reflection sort of it sort of becomes detrimental to the self. But again, where is that balance? Where is that line there? And I don't know if well, especially I do know with the advent of new technology and stuff, and we're going to get off the social media stuff. I just want to bring that cursory because I didn't actually touch upon it in the show. But yeah, I think sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
Well, I think I had something came to mind while you were talking, and it was this idea that so Narcissus, he's losing himself in his reflection. And I think there's a really important distinction about that, because if you're focused so much on that sort of projection of yourself, it's like that episode you did on hyper reality. You end up cultivating the fake strawberry flavor of yourself, and you don't cultivate the true nature of yourself. And I think that, especially even on social media, that happens. If you're not, I guess authentic is the word, right? Then it becomes just a pretty boring account because it's repeating the same reflections that other people are trying to repeat.
Yeah, I think that's apt.
And you also start to get into Sartre's broken mirror thing, right? Like you can never really adequately self-reflect no matter how many mirrors you construct, which then goes into why people have friends. Friends are supposed to be another version of yourself that can in theory, provide an accurate reflection and tell you where things are going astray if they are. Just be there as that objective voice in your life.
Yeah, and then a necessary external focus, I think, is definitely key. And you get into a little bit of the solipsism with the story of Narcissus and all of this self-obsession. And perhaps you're right. The antidote to that is to actually put your focus on others and not die while you're staring at yourself in the pool.
You end up the friends things too. Like anytime you trust somebody, so the thing that Riker said to Data. You open yourself up to betrayal, which can actually lead someone towards narcissism. Like if I put all of my trust in you and I granted you the permissions of being my mirror in a way, another version of myself, and then that gets screwed over somewhere, that might propel a person to stare at themselves in a mirror until they push their face through the mirror and choke on the glass or choke on. So it is a really interesting balance when we talk about reflection and the self versus reflecting in other people.
Yeah, perfect. I think we can jump into the myth now because it's going to give us a lot more to talk about. What I really liked about this particular myth is that it can be told in two different perspectives. So I'm going to give you guys each of those perspectives so that we can sort of talk and see what we glean from the myth itself. By the way, I did want to plug the cold open is The Metamorphosis of Narcissus by Salvador Dali. And he wrote that poem basically as an inspiration to Ovid's Metamorphosis, and in particular, the character of Narcissus. So I thought that was appropriate. Thank you, Mr. Dali, for the poem. We appreciate you. So the myth of Narcissus. So Narcissus' mother was named Liriope, and she gave birth to Narcissus, and then went to a seer named Tiresias. It's just spelled so weird.
Tiresias?
Yeah, Tiresias. There you go. Who predicted that the boy would live a long, happy life if only he never discovered himself. Just like the Greeks.
Okay, there's like a joke there, but I'm not going to go there.
Yeah. Your child's gonna live a long, happy life as long as he never stubs his pinky toe on the corner of a table. Like, okay. One and so one day Narcissus was walking through the woods when Echo, who's a mountain nymph, saw him and fell deeply in love and decided to follow him. Narcissus sensed that he was being followed and shouted, "Who's there?" Echo repeated, "Who's there?" She eventually revealed her identity and attempted to embrace him. He stepped away and told her to leave him alone. She was heartbroken and spent the rest of her life lonely in the glens until nothing but an echo of herself remained. Nemesis, the goddess of revenge, noticed this behavior after learning the story and decided to punish Narcissus. One day during the summer, he was getting thirsty after hunting, and the goddess lured him to a pool where he leaned upon the water and saw himself in the bloom of youth. Narcissus did not realize it was merely his own reflection and fell deeply in love with it, as if it were another young man. Unable to leave the allure of his image, he eventually realized that his love could not be reciprocated, and he melted away from the fire of passion burning inside him and eventually turned into a gold and white flower. I think that there's something really that pops out for me just from Narcissus's end, and that's the omen, right? The omen from the seer. He's going to live a long and happy life as long as he is never discovers himself. And I think that that's a really interesting point, because I think you can dig a little bit deeper to more metaphorical ideas of the self and discovering the self. And we kind of get into this almost a Garden of Eden concept, where to know the self is to become mortal and to die. So I just thought that popped out for me immediately when I read that, because it's more than just the reflection. The reflection also kind of represents the knowledge of knowing thyself as well, and thus knowing that you will eventually meet your demise.
Yeah, I can see that, but there's usually, like in these omens and prophecies, there's usually like something in between the lines, right? So like, why does Narcissus live a happy life if he never knows himself or discovers himself? It's not because he discovers himself that he dies. It's because there is a I guess I can say that a pathological nature to Narcissus that makes him fall in love with himself. So like, I think it's okay to know yourself, but when you push that too far, that's where it becomes an issue. Like, the thing that keeps popping up in my head is sort of the Fight Club quote. Self-improvement is self-saturation, but self-destruction, now that's, the movie goes on. So like, I get those vibes from that, where it's like just that one step past knowing.
Right.
It's the infatuation with the knowledge, I guess.
I agree. And I think I wanted to point out specifically, it's the irony that's usually embedded in Greek mythology. The fact that his mother kept him from knowing himself for so long that when he finally saw his reflection, it brought his own demise. I think that there's a reverse sort of fable there, where it's like, yes, just because a seer tells you can't show your boy his own reflection, well, if you follow that path, you may inadvertently cause his own destruction, because he wasn't accustomed to knowing himself or seeing himself. And so he waited so long in his life that by the time he actually saw his own reflection, it brought upon his demise, because he had never seen it before.
Yeah, I'm getting like the overprotective parent vibe. Like the parent that prevents their child from ever failing or messing up or something,
right?
Or going out, and then once that child turns into an adult and has freedom to do so, kind of just goes crazy.
Yeah, it's the story of the Buddha, right? The Buddha was a prince that lived inside a wall fortress and never knew suffering until he went outside of the wall fortress, and then he became a monk. Yeah, it's that overarching or overbearing parent that wants to keep the world from you, ultimately sort of leading to your own destruction. In the Buddhist case, it was a spiritual destruction, but In Narcissus's case, it was literal destruction. But that's where we get the very pretty flower. So, that's nice.
Hey, all things aren't bad, right? Sacrifice.
Absolutely.
We
Right.
get a pretty flower.
Yeah. Ayla, you have any thoughts before I move on?
No, I mean it's fascinating stuff to sort of tie in the Buddha and knowledge of self and dig into self. The Fight Club reference, very nice contribution. One thing that just kind of stood out to me is that idea where it's sort of like he didn't know it was himself. He where they said, he sort of just fell in love, not realizing that. And I think that that's kind of interesting too, where you have sort of the this is from a book. They talk about the indwelling being, which is sort of the voice inside of your head. And in a lot of ways, you can think of that as separate from your physical being, because your physical being experiences the world and ages and all of that stuff. But the internal voice or your internal self sort of seems separate, but not. It's you, but I think that if you reflect on consciousness a little bit, or you reflect on sort of this idea that we have of ourselves and the gap that exists between what we really are and whether what we really are is perception of others of what we are, or our perception of ourselves of what we are, I think it just kind of gets into some of that sort of stuff.
I think there's a interesting question here, because this was kind of shocking to me when I learned that not everybody has an internal monologue or internal dialogue, or or an internal cacophony of voices. Maybe that last one is for the best, but it makes me wonder if Narcissus was the type to have an internal voice or not. If that was something that this character developed, and maybe if it is for a lack of, then that's why he didn't know his own reflection, to why he fell so in love with it so quickly.
Right. And perfect segue into the other perspective of this myth, which is that sort of echo, right? The reverberation of the self. And that's sort of manifested in the character Echo, who is, again, a mountain nymph. And nymphs had it the worst, man. I swear, I feel so bad for nymphs. All the nymphs basically just were being chased around by gods and really accosted. And most of them had a terrible demise. So we'll just put that out there. But
got horribly rejected. I mean,
or
poor
got
thing.
horribly rejected. Yes, absolutely.
Poor thing. She's just following him, totally in love, and then he's just like, "Leave me alone."
Nope.
She's heartbroken, and she spends her life lonely.
I would say that Mike's note about the sort of inner monologue, I think there might be some parallels here with Echo. So let me let you know about that story, and then we can pick back up. So this is also in the book 3 of Metamorphosis, and it tells a story of a talkative nymph whom the goddess Venus admired for her magnificent voice and song. She then does something stupid, which is decide to trick Hera that Zeus was in a city that he wasn't in. There's not a whole lot of information as to what the ruse was, but you can obviously, when you're messing with Hera, you don't need a whole lot of cunning or complexity for her to get upset. So Hera decided to curse Echo by making her able to only finish a sentence not started and unable to say anything on her own. And there's a quote here, says, quote, "Yet a chatterbox had no other use of speech than she has now, that she could repeat only the last words out of many." This is an explanation for the oral effect. Obviously, we get the word echo from this deity Echo. And sometime after being cursed, Echo spied a young man, Narcissus, while he was out hunting deer with his companions. She immediately fell in love with him and was infatuated. And so she quietly followed him. And the more she looked at the young man, the more she longed for him. Though she wished with all of her heart to call out to Narcissus, Hera's curse prevented her from doing so. During the hunt, Narcissus became separated from his companions and called out, "Is anyone there?" and heard the nymph repeat his words. Startled, Narcissus answered answered the voice, "Come here," only to be told the same. When Narcissus saw that nobody had emerged from the glade, he concluded that the owner of the voice must be running away from him and called out again. Finally, he shouted, "This way, we must come together." Taking this to be a reciprocation of her love, Echo concurred ecstatically, "We must come together." In her delight, Echo rushed to Narcissus, ready to throw her arms around her beloved. Narcissus, however, was appalled and spurned her, exclaimed, "Hands off! May I die before you ever enjoy my body." All Echo could whisper in reply was, "Enjoy my body." And having done so, she fled, scorned, humiliated, and shamed. Despite the harshness of his rejection, Echo's love for Narcissus only grew. When Narcissus died, wasted away before his own reflection, consumed by a love that could not be, Echo mourned over his body. When Narcissus, looking one last time into the pool, uttered, "O marvelous boy, I love you in vain, farewell," Echo too chorused, "Farewell." Eventually, Echo too began to waste away. Though she was immortal, her body faded and her bones turned to stone. Today, all that remains of Echo is the sound of her voice.
That is so sad.
It's a sad one, right?
That is so sad. And also, at the same time, I have to just love that, you know, there's a myth about echoes. You know, I mean, you think about it, like, we don't really think much of an echo now, but, you know, back then, I'm sure it was quite startling, being like, well, what the heck is that about? What is that? What is that?
Yeah, you'd think it's a fairy in the woods trying to, mess with you.
Right, exactly. And what's even funnier is I've mentioned this once before on this show, but like Union Station, there's a very specific room where if you stand on one side of the room and whisper, somebody on the other side of the room can hear you and nobody else in between can. And I think that the concept of sort of like sound and the way it can be engineered, it had to be observed naturally before we could have thought to do something like that. So it makes sense that, yeah, they would have been really creeped out about it. But then knowing like there's no harm, so let's make a myth out of it. And then that this is the myth. Poor heartbroken little thing. Quite sad.
Yeah. And it definitely reminded me of what Mike was talking about, this inner monologue, this inner voice. Because she's sort of cursed to only repeat the things that are already said. So you kind of, I don't know, I get this idea of this sort of ego, and then, I don't know, you could call it not conscious, but maybe some sort of other structure there. Narcissus being sort of the ego, and then I don't know what you would categorize Echo as, but yeah.
It could be those things that stick with you that other people say, or maybe that romantic partners say to you, something like that, because Echo was so entranced by Narcissus. That's a beautifully tragic perspective, though. Really
it is, isn't it? Yeah.
Not in like the classic Greek tragedy sort of way, but just tragic in the modern day sense of the word. Yeah, but sometimes fate be like that.
It does indeed. Yes, absolutely. And, yeah, go ahead, Ayla.
Well, and it's interesting too, because here, the nature of love, had Echo just been taught, the value of standards and boundaries and self-worth, and to not, like pine after somebody who's showing you that they are not interested. She might have had a much healthier engagement with this character. So it kind of says something about the nature of love, in that you cannot help who you are in love with. Once you fall in love, you are in love, and it is like to death in this case.
Or the case of the Narcissus side, like just slow down and listen, not be so quick to spurn, not be so quick to react, try to take in more information and understand what's happening, or not be in such a rush or something. You know,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. I think
'Cause
there's yeah.
sorry,
It's okay.
yeah, because if there was something following me in the woods, just repeating the last things that I said, I had no notion of like the echo phenomena. I would hope that I would at least try to figure out more what was happening. Like
Mm.
if I tried to place myself in Narcissus' shoes.
Right. You would also wonder too, and this isn't really expounded upon in the story, obviously, but you would also wonder too if Narcissus may have thought that it was himself responding to himself, because he seems very repulsed when it's not, when it's just some other person. I like. I don't know what he was. I don't know what he was thinking was going to happen. Like, because to me, like his repulsion doesn't seem justified if he thought that there had to be somebody out there, unless he thought himself to be out there. Like it's him talking to himself, you know, like maybe because the rewards were repeated, he thought he was hearing himself talk to himself. I don't know.
Or
That's
maybe
never really expounded upon. So I don't know.
but I also think it could just be kind of like what Mike was saying, that Narcissus never slowed down to take time to get to know this externality. You know, he was so, focused on himself, or maybe, yeah, I mean, if he thought that that was himself talking, and then it's this other thing, it's like, I don't have time for you, get out, get away from me, you know? And so, yeah, yeah, I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know
because
why
you
he
have
was.
to you have to think that the so this event happens before him gazing into the pool. And this is really the reason that he gets cursed to gaze into the pool. So I think there's a loose sort of lesson in his quick to spurnness, being a sort of representation of his self-absorption, his inability to, like you guys have said, like recognize and appreciate another person. And so, yeah, when he spurns Echo, that's when he's punished to go look at himself, and that's when he falls in love with himself to his death.
Yeah, and there's also I'll go for it, yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna make a joke. Like, I feel really bad for Echo because when he says, may I die before you enjoy my body, and her response is, "Enjoy my body."
Mhm.
She's bled, like scorned and humiliated and shamed. It's like, that poor thing. It just, yeah.
And there may be also too the bigger tragedy of circumstance here, where she may have not known he's on a hunt, right? And if I was hunting and something came out at the woods at me, I too might have followed this narcissist path where it's like, what are you doing around me, you weirdo?
Yeah.
I'm busy.
I'm
I
out
don't got time for
here
that.
trying to like hunt. Well, even just think about something that what was that movie where like they find a temple and the plants are carnivorous plants and they can actually fake the voices of
Oh,
the humans around them.
the ruins.
Yeah, like it could have been something like that. Like just the mindset of being in a hunt could be not the right moment to approach somebody to be like, I'm head over heels in love with you.
Yeah,
You know,
you might want to choose a better time.
yeah, and just like especially with the curse that she had. And
Right.
how is she supposed to know that he's on a hunt, right? She just sees this guy that she fell in love with walking through the woods. So there's a little bit of mistiming and a little bit of tragedy of circumstance playing within the story, I feel like.
As always with the Greeks, man. Wrong place, wrong time most of the time.
No.
Yeah. I really enjoy you guys' interpretations of that. That's great.
Why was he appalled? I just don't understand. Are nymphs like appalling creatures?
So that's what I was gonna say. I think we
Probably
always
not.
we always
I highly doubt that.
but it's funny because we do associate nymphs with sort of fairies, and they are, like we associate them with feminine. But there's nothing really to say that maybe this nymph wasn't like a mass of eyeballs. that was like floating towards him. You know what I mean? Like who knows? Maybe Echo was a whole bunch of snakes. Like,
well, now we're also getting to like the crux of disgust, right? Narcissists love themselves so much that everything else that looks different disgusts them,
right,
or absolutely. Something of that course. That level of disgust is on narcissism. Probably the mother that sheltered him so much, where that reflex of the reflex caused him to recoil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and it's funny because you mentioned, I think I heard you say sylph, or maybe that's just what came to mind. But like in dance history, early ballet, there was a lot of attention paid to the representation of sylphs, and the sort of idea was that a sylph was like a lovely young maiden and adhered to sort of strict beauty standards and aesthetics. And I was just Googling like difference between sylph versus nymph. And I have this little passage here. It says sylphs are composed of the purest atoms of the air and the nymphs of the most delicate particles of water.
Okay.
And so I don't know. I mean, there's probably more to it, and that could be like some Wiccan excerpt. I apologize, but
No,
I do wonder.
You're right. Nymphs are usually water spirits.
Oh, okay, gotcha. And I just wonder, why our aesthetics of beauty in the early dance world would have adhered to the sylph and not nymphs. I think, nymphs tended to have more of like, maybe not so much grotesque, but more of a non-human identity, maybe.
Much more fluid too. I mean, air would have been on the hierarchy of elements. Air is sort of the highest in the sort of ancient ideas. So it would make sense that the sylph being the embodiment of like that etheric quality, that it would have that distinction, probably.
Yeah, there's especially with spectic dance too. Air probably has a little bit more of a notion of like grace, like graceful movements, to move like the wind versus to move like a river, or to bounce back and forth like an ocean or something.
Come on, passing wind. That's not that pretty. Just kidding.
Hey, depends who you ask, right? We don't kink shame over here. But just the general notion of moving air. And like, nymphs do get a bad rap. I don't know if that spirit is connected to things like nymphomania. I don't know if there's any actual connection there, but it's interesting.
There is. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So then, that spelling still gets spelling. So you still have those sorts of origins of notion where that may not be as graceful as something like a sylph, or perceived as graceful. So that energy you may not want to carry in dance. Like, those are the only things that I can think of. But nymphs do get a bad rap.
Yeah, they're seen as sexual objects in the Greeks, especially with Zeus. Zeus was all about accosting nymphs, and he did that quite a bit. That's where you get the concept of nymphomania, because the gods used to love the nymphs because they were so beautiful. But again, another layer of sort of a layer of meaning there, right? Echo being a nymph, which is a water goddess, and Narcissus' eventual demise being a pool of water to reflect himself from. So you get that little, ties it up in a bow. The Greeks were really good at that. They like doing that type of shit. My dog is barking at something.
Oh my gosh, I love the echo. I'm going to mute my mic. And I will go find out what she's barking about. I'll be back.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Oh my goodness.
How's she doing?
Oh, she's great. I mean, very vocal and guarding our house. So hopefully there's nobody trying to walk around.
Hopefully. That'd be
not.
really awkward.
Yeah, Ayla can yell, and I'll just go running. So if I end up running out of here, you'll know why.
I'll try to maintain the podcast while I simultaneously worry about both of y'all's health and
exactly.
the dog.
We're listening to strange sounds in the background. Yeah, exactly. Jeez Louise.
I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna make a quick phone call. Fans, I'll be right back.
It was a person walking their dog.
Of course it was.
She's just
Yeah.
jealous,
How dare they be so close to our house?
honestly.
So yeah, again, a nice little wrap up of the myth, and I think that's what I got for just the overall myth. And I want to get into some more stuff with you guys.
I thought you were gonna be like, and that's all I got. And I was like, okay,
Yeah,
cool.
we got more. I definitely have
Short
more. Don't worry.
100.
But before I get into the next sort of segment of this conversation, I wanted to ask you guys. So, what do you think it is that we gaze upon when we're sort of ruminating on our reflection? Because I can see it in sort of like a multiple of ways, and maybe you guys see this too, where it's that you're seeing what is, but you're also kind of seeing what was and what could be as well. Do you think I'm off about that? But I mean, like, to me, it would seem that if I'm going to ruminate on my reflection, I'm not just going to be staying in sort of the present moment. I might be, taking stock of the past or projecting myself out into the future as well. What do you guys think? What are we looking at when we're sort of ruminating on our reflections?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. You can look good in a mirror and then you take a photo and you're like, what the hell happened?
It's all about lighting.
More lighting and mirrors are flipped, right? You don't know. Very few people have an honest mirror in their house.
Oh, they all lie, which is great.
Yeah. Have you actually seen your reflection in the mirror that actually does it properly? It's
Oh,
bizarre.
it's
It's
awful.
so bizarre.
Wait, your reflection in a mirror? Isn't that what you just see in a mirror?
So most mirrors are flipped in like the opposite way. You don't see an honest. You don't actually see how other people see you. You have to buy a special kind of mirror for that. Same thing with like cameras and stuff. That's why like when you take selfies, sometimes they flip it and you look awkward as hell because you're looking at the actual like your X coordinates are actually like over here. They're just flipped.
Yeah. It's mirrored.
Yeah, it's mirrored. It's not how the world sees you. That's why you probably look better in a mirror than you do in a photo.
What about a lake reflection? It would also be mirrored, right?
Mhm.
It's not like just the mirror. Okay, so it's just reflections because of the nature of the way they're reflected. Yeah, so one, then you're looking at the opposite horizontal plane of your face. That's one thing you're looking at.
Yeah, when you touch the right side of your face, it looks like the left side of your face. Like right now, this is the left side of my face.
Oh, but it looks like the right.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
That's what we're talking about here,
So
and that gets into the concept of Sartre and all that stuff too.
Are we ruminating on physical reflection or like, because like when I look into a mirror and really like ruminate on it, I'm just staring at it. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm okay to go to bed that night, like
Okay.
that I can live with myself for that day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my level of it. Like that's specifically why I feel like the mirror exists, is if I can live with myself. Anything past that is, I feel like, a different form of reflection that I don't want to get conflated in this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, well, reflections. I think it's interesting in the sense that, like, the more I stare at myself, the more I notice that, like, my face doesn't have any distinction. Like, your eyebrow is just a shape, your eyeball is just a fleshy thing inside of a socket, and then like if you're brushing your teeth.
You've ruminated to the point of deconstruction.
Well, I mean, well, like mostly it's when I'm brushing my teeth, right? Like I'll be brushing my teeth and I don't know why, but like I look at myself when I'm brushing my teeth as if it helps me brush my teeth. Like I'm making sure I went left, right, middle, left, middle, right, bottom, top. And what's really funny is that when I'm doing the front, I, curl back my lips and I'm brushing my teeth and I'm suddenly mindful of that. Like there's a skull under there. And that's when like that's usually when I'm in front of the mirror, I start wondering to myself, like, how weird are we? Just like,
well, and I think that this is a really good point, right? Because we do talk about, like in the myth of Narcissus, his reflection being his ultimate demise. Not quite the same, but I do appreciate that you're talking kind of about this deconstruction idea that when you stare at yourself long enough, you do realize that you're just a meat sack with a skeleton.
Exactly.
And,
Well
you
put.
know, like, and that is a sort of a destruction of the self. You're kind of tearing the ego down and seeing yourself as the biological reality, you know,
Right.
and not the
Exactly.
archetype that you've created in your mind.
Right. Or in the sense that like your mind is just this little voice in your head. You don't like, I don't picture myself when I'm thinking. And then all of a sudden there I am. And then you think about the disconnect between this like Men in Black sort of alien with the controls in your mind moving you. And yet there's this physical vehicle that's kind of moving through the world. And you're right, also changes throughout time. I remember being really little and I used to stare in the mirror, but I only because I thought there was like another world on the other side, you know?
Mirror world. Yeah.
Mirror
Yeah,
world,
mirror
yeah.
world. Yeah, I did that too.
Mhm.
Yeah. I just loved looking at doors.
Did everybody's
in other
parents have one of
mirrors.
those sliding glass?
I know mine
closets?
did.
Yeah, mine did.
I think that was like a 70s closet trend.
I think
like,
so.
because it
Yeah.
had the gold trim, right?
Yep. Uh-huh. Yep.
Or
I had
brass.
this one mirror that was next to the front door. It was a floor to ceiling mirror,
Mm-hmm.
and I would stare into it, and I would like go like this to it in hopes that I could press my
Matrix
finger
it.
through it.
Right,
yeah,
right.
I'd like try to like.
Not
Sadly,
today.
that never happened.
Damn Someday, man. Someday it will happen.
I just got to keep doing it, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Did you
absolutely.
Mind over
ever-
matter.
Yep.
Did you ever talk to the other self in the mirror as if it could be another version of you in another alternate reality?
I had to get through those days. I was looking to the mirror like that. Yeah, it was like, so is this our life? Is this what we're going through? Yeah,
Did that just
it
happen to you
is.
too?
Mm.
Yeah, it is. So what are we gonna do? It's like, well, just keep going. It'd be a full dialogue between me and myself. As an only child, this is what you have to do.
Absolutely.
Get a third mirror. It's you, yourself, and I, or me, myself, and
Oh.
I.
Oh no, because then the two are gonna gang up on one of them, and it's gonna get really ugly. No, we don't do that anymore. No, I'm just kidding.
Or how about, okay, this is kind of getting off topic, but do you remember going to like Sears or
Yeah, the dressing
Mervyn's?
rooms with the circular dressing rooms with the
Well,
mirrors. Yeah.
No, I was thinking the escalators
Oh,
where there's
yeah.
mirrors on both sides,
Oh,
and then
yeah.
you see like infinite you. And I
I've
would,
never understood why they do that.
It's
Sorry,
trippy.
to
my favorite part of going to those department stores is just go up and down the escalator. Oh, there's a million of me. Now it's just me. No, there's a million of me. Now it's just me. No, there's a million of me. It's fun.
It is
Yeah.
fun. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this gets a little bit into, I wanted to ask about reflection and all of that stuff because it gets a little bit into what Mike had mentioned with the broken mirror in Sartre, which I couldn't exactly find in its sort of like the exact description of that, but I believe it comes from the transcendence of ego. And this is going to get really wordy. And I'm going to need your guys' big brains to help me parse this out. So I'm going to read this, and I apologize.
Oh, hang on a second.
Yes.
Go gadget, big brain.
Go gadget, big brain, please. I will need the help to sort of. Once I read it, you'll
Sartre.
understand why.
Sartre goes. You actually gonna read Sartre? Sartre goes on for a long time about this.
Oh yes.
Can I
absolutely.
just actually interject a
Mhm.
funny story about Sartre?
Sure.
Okay, so I learned this from a professor who studied him like a lot, like all there is to know about him. And the funniest story is that in his education, he fell in love. Well, he had a classmate, and they were both sort of like the top philosophy students. And there was a contest where they were sort of like the two top essays being reviewed by the panel of judges. And Sartre's submission was very verbose, but very creative. The other student actually happened to be Simone de Beauvoir, and it was very perfunctual, succinct, well argued, to the point, just a fine essay. But whether it was because she was a woman or they valued creativity over that sort of, brevity or whatnot, they ended up awarding Sartre the big prize. And a lot of philosophers out there credit this as sort of the moment when Sartre said, "Oh, I don't have to rein in my writing, not one bit. I can just be Mr. Smarty Pants and just
Mhm.
teppity, 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 teppity."
Certainly.
And then he did not a short piece write
No, and
thereafter.
yeah, and this is just from the wiki because obviously I didn't read the whole thing and I just needed to sort of get the gist. And
Mhm.
even the gist I needed to read a few times, and I'm probably going to mess it up when I read it to you guys right now. So
You
strap
got
in.
this.
I hope that this makes sense for you guys. But this is Sartre and the
Transcendence of
transcendence
ego.
of ego. Yeah. So he talks about this concept of intentional objects, and they're objects of consciousness. That is to say, physical objects, numbers, values, the psyche, the psychophysical persons, that Sartre agreed should be studied in their own right. It was also Sartre's view, which differed from is it Husserl's? Is that what it is? Ayla, do you know?
I don't know
Okay,
actually.
that's fine. It's some other guy.
Some other
That
guy.
intentional objects are consciousness, and that the value of intended stuffs was in consciousness of them. Intentional objects are therefore both objects of consciousness and consciousness, and this is because consciousness is both itself a reflection of it. Sartre described the cogito by noting that the consciousness which says I think, this is to the consciousness that can reflect on the mental concept of thinking. It is not the consciousness which thinks. So one can think of one's own thinking, like the idea that a painting of a pipe is not an actual pipe. And so consciousness is of its own properties transcendental, as there is inclusive in it itself and reflection of it. So for Sartre, intentional objects are objects for consciousness and consciousness itself. I just said that. Just as consciousness itself is both consciousness and reflecting consciousness. Moreover, consciousness is in the world as we are conscious of things, but we are also conscious of ourselves being conscious of things. So things and our own consciousness of things evoke our own reflective consciousness. However, there exists no easier or less mundane sounding explanation of what is meant here. It remains to be pointed out that the consciousness of reflection is not able to be reflected on. When an external object is perceived, consciousness is also conscious of itself, even if consciousness is not its own object. It is a non-positional consciousness of itself, whereas when an object is perceived, consciousness is a positional one. There is no need for a reflection. Consciousness is always aware of its activity and experience. This is what Sartre calls unreflective consciousness. In light of this for Sartre, the constitution of the ego is states and actions in brackets these intended objects we speak of. It supports. This is to say that the material presence of things in turn proves the ontology of the object contemplating them. Ego is then nothing without something in which to contemplate, but is reliant on itself and its being. Further, the flexibility of consciousness for Sartre is the ability to contemplate something in its absence, this being special for his idea of reflection. He concludes that though people can contemplate the same thing, we cannot contemplate the, quote, intuitive apprehension of another. This connotes that Sartrean idea of becoming apprehensive about the awareness that we are about to be responsible for our own doings, and also that we can be conscious of the things like other consciousness is conscious of the thing. But we cannot reflect on their being consciousness of the thing like we can reflect on our being consciousness of the thing. In this, we are still only condemned to making ourselves as we battle with our own consciousness, and so we don't create the world. We are objects in the world. All right, that was a lot of consciousness, guys.
I was
And
gonna say,
consciousness,
get a
consciousness.
thesaurus, Sartre. Jesus.
I know, right? So forgive me, I'm going to sort of butcher my interpretation of this, but I think that what he is saying in some aspects of this, because it is quite dense, what stood out to me the most is that the concept of being conscious of a thing, but also being conscious of your being conscious of the thing. Therefore, it kind of skews the perception of that thing. Help me out, guys. Give me some juice here, because my brain just seizured.
There's a
Nick's
good reason.
notes.
There's a good reason why I have Ayla's on Being in Nothingness on the shelf and haven't read past like page 50.
Oh my god, you gotta read it so slowly, huh?
It's just like once you get down to that stuff, like, all right, again, you can just say that it's impossible for the consciousness to reflect on itself because it is itself. And
Right.
it can't objectively do that. You can be conscious of the conscious, but you can't be conscious of the conscious reflecting on the conscience of the conscience. Just move that away. And just so you can't reflect on yourself because you're broken. All right, all of us are broken. We are not the thing, but we are the thing of the thing. We're looking
That's thinking
at
about the thing. I'm just
but the thing is
playing
ourselves.
a dude that's acting like another.
like a dude. He's disguised as another dude. No, I got a lot of respect for Sartre, but like, yeah, this
Come on.
in
No.
programming, I do because he did it in a very systematic way. Yes, it's verbose. Yes, it's tiresome, and he probably had a chip on his shoulder. Where he was writing everything, but I get that. It's fine. Do your own thing, but like, yeah, in programming, this you end up. We have this thing called infinite recursion. You can think of like looking at a mirror of yourself as some sort of recursion of viewing yourself. You keep adding more mirrors. No matter how many mirrors you get, you're going to run into that infinity thing, and you're going to hit a depth that you can no longer properly operate. And that's what I feel like they're touching on. Is like it's an ad absurdum practice to try to say that you can fully reflect on yourself completely, because you can't.
Right, without taking sort of infinitesimal shards of yourself over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, or like, breaking the mirror, like saying, like providing one perspective from this one. Like, yeah, a mirror can only see at one angle. A satellite can only see at one angle. When you reflect on yourself, you're only seeing one angle.
Right.
If you try to put up an infinity amount of mirrors, you cannot, over the course of your life, explain every perspective of that mirror of yourself at a one point in time. Because your consciousness should always be at least attempting to grow and change in some way. So then how can you say at time 30 years and 300 X amount of days, I'm going to take an infinite amount of time to reflect on me right now? You can't.
Right. Yeah. Ayla, thoughts?
Oh, I have all the thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I'm a big fan of Sartre. As much as I like to kind of shit on his parade, I just love sort of, because he kind of repeats himself sometimes, or he'll have one idea and then he might contradict it, but then you realize that it's kind of intentional, and then it's like scaffolds your understanding of what he's talking about. And the more, like, you can read him and you're like, oh, I get it, and then you read him again like a year later and you're just like, I didn't get it. And then you read it again, you're like, no, I got it now. And then you don't. But one thing I think is really key in terms of grounding this discussion, I think he uses the word ontology here, which is just the nature of being. And being is very much a hard thing to describe, but we definitely tie it to our thoughts, and then when you think about that, it's like, well, are we thinking of our thoughts, our imagination, our consciousness, our, observations? Like, if it's flawed, what does that mean? If it's not flawed, what does that mean? And I do like this idea that what does he talks about? Like, in intrinsic sort of, oh, okay, non-positional versus positional. I think, and I guess the way that I kind of think about it is in the sense that you have the real world, right? And if you were to represent something in the real world, it's pretty obvious how to do that. If I want to replicate a cup, I know how to do that. I make a cup, I form it out of clay, I can draw it with charcoal, etc. But if I were going to replicate the mind, I can't draw that. I can't mold that. I can't like bring that into the real world. The only thing I have is a representation of it or some model of it. And I understand that whatever I try to represent it as is never going to be anywhere near what it actually is, because I'm not even sure I know what it is in order to be the one creating it. Still, I know that it is because I am aware of it. And that's where he defines the difference between what does he talk
That
about?
could be too.
Well, consciousness versus reflecting consciousness. You know, where you have sort of, I am aware, and think of aware as sort of like a model, right? So that's the cup. The awareness, consciousness, like it is. We know it is. But then we can use that consciousness to reflect on the consciousness. And I think that when you start reflecting on your own consciousness, therein you create this gap where now you're trying to define it. You're trying to define the undefinable.
You know what this
And there's two separate things there.
Yeah. You know what this reminds me of? Do you guys know that GIF where the like somebody puts a little flower petal on the cat's head? And then it just like it shrinks down and like its eyes go wide and just blasts through space. That's like kind of what I feel like when you're like talking about consciousness turning in on itself and understanding consciousness. It's like you just like rip the fabric of reality wide open.
Well, yeah, because you know, like I mean, especially with ontology, it's so closely related to metaphysics, where it's like, what is real? And you think, well, I mean, you think that this table in front of you is real, but like it's only real because you can see it and you can touch it, and it pushes back when you try to push on it. But there's like so many things that could explain that if you were in a coma, or if we were in like another hyper reality or whatever, you know, like
Just quantum.
quantum.
Like that's not the table you're touching. It's the electrons that are repulsing.
Yeah. There's still space between it. Yeah. And then you can think about how like this physical reality is just all one thing. I mean, right? So like when you get down to sort of Sartre's time without all that noise adding on to it, it's really just a person writing and they're reflecting. And he's like, okay, well, the fact that I'm reflecting on my ability to reflect creates a schism. And what is real and which is me? And how do I think about each of these things? Are they the same thing or are they not the same thing? And he also talks about intrinsicness. You know, this is like the quality of something, you know. And the question is yeah, and the question is if your reflecting self is doing reflecting and you have your other self, or I guess consciousness, then where is the which one's intrinsic, right? And are they the same? And if they're the same, how do we describe the distance between them? It's the key.
Yeah, the thing, and then the thing looking at the thing. Yeah. Which one is the thing? And I think that that's
and how
really,
do you trust one?
well, and this is why I wanted to bring this into the conversation too, because we think about this myth of Narcissus and his reflection. To me, his story inherently kind of speaks to something about this, in which this understanding within the myth itself that the reflection was never reality. The reflection wasn't real. Even though Narcissus felt it was real, there is an understanding there that there is something illusory or inauthentic about the reflection. And I think that that's an interesting sort of parallel that we're having here, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and you know, ego. Sorry, just to add one more thing. When he talks about the ego, is then nothing without something in which to contemplate. but is reliant on itself and its being. At some point around there in the conclusion, he talks about ego equaling states and or actions. And I think that's really key too, because if you're looking at consciousness versus reflecting consciousness, you can also define consciousness as a state and reflecting consciousness as a sort of action.
Right.
And so with Narcissus falling in love with himself, that is an action versus just being maybe they're alluding to the idea that he started out as sort of this human living life and being in the present. And then when he delved into that reflecting consciousness, it sort of took him out of his natural state into
Yeah, he
this
yoded out,
abstraction.
man. He
Yeah.
yoded into the ether and then became a flower and then was immortalized. I mean, the Greeks do this a lot. They immortalize characters through flora and fauna. And then you get this concept of Narcissus flower popping up in its stead. You know, you can kind of almost come to the analog or the comparison of almost immortality, sort of
Transcendence.
transcendence. Thanks.
I do have one question.
Yes,
would it?
you can have more than one if you want.
Have 20.
20 questions. Could the reflecting consciousness and the non-reflecting consciousness be two states, and the narcissist's action while in the state of reflecting consciousness is staring down to a lake cause his demise, where if he would have did that without being a reflecting conscious, he would have drank water
Like an animal.
Yeah, and just left, right?
Mhm.
Like he wasn't aware.
Yeah.
Just to kind of because in a AI point of view, right? Like if I'm let's say I have some project Narcissus. I'm gonna create an AI.
All right.
Right. And I see these, you say state, so I see a state machine. And I hear action, so I think of agent AI that's built into these actions or built into these states. So I see the reflecting conscious is one state and the non-reflecting conscious is the other. Do you think that's a applicable model to this thing we call consciousness?
Yeah, that's like the bicameral mind, isn't that what they call it? You have like these two functions working sort of in contrast and cooperation with each other.
Yeah, maybe it could be a feedback loop between these two states, but we have this one action of looking into a lake.
Yes.
And in the state of the reflective consciousness for Project Narcissus, the AI kills itself.
Mm-hmm.
But in the non-reflecting consciousness, because it's unaware of itself, it simply drinks water.
Right.
Is that with respect to Sartre, would that be an applicable model?
I think that's probably pretty close. Yeah, it's the acknowledgement of the self, right? It's the regard of the self. Hey, go ahead, Hila. Sorry.
Well, except see, okay, that's a very interesting question, Mike, because the thing is that Sartre also wrote existentialism as a humanism, and it was a defense of existentialism and an attempt to define it as its true definition, which essentially is just individualism. And so it's interesting to think about coding AI in this sort of like group, like it's going to replicate something ad infinitum, as opposed to being its own thing that then replicates individualistically as its own thing. And that's where I think it gets even heavier. So I don't know how I would answer that question because I just added a new layer and I kind of need more background in AI coding. Because then I'm like, well, are you modeling or are you representing at that point?
But I think I think that's
Mm.
probably a good threshold, whether an AI model would regard its own reflection or simply drink the water. I think that's a pretty decent model as to like where we would draw that distinction between intelligence and non-intelligence.
I do like the multiple layers of theory here because Yeah, you're right. Like, so like if suppose I'm a creationist and I really hardcore believe in God and I am the reflection of God, or like the things, then you can argue that humans are just representations of God and not models of God, correct?
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So then we would also, as we have reached up through the towers of Babel and become God ourselves, we now
Oh
must
yeah.
pose our questions to us. Are we modeling or are we representing? And I find that really interesting. Yeah,
Yes.
no, it's,
Yes. Absolutely.
yeah, I think a narcissistic creator might end up making that consciousness, that reflecting consciousness, a bit stronger. Where it would see its own, whereas something as a benevolent God bumbling his or her way through the act of creating something would just model it, and it just so happens that these two states exist.
Mm,
Yeah, I
hmm.
think representation would imply intention, where modeling does not.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, because modeling, you're kind of trying to recreate it. Representing, you're sort of trying to replicate properties,
Engineer.
qualia,
Well, like
engineer.
you're pushing that consciousness reflecting on itself into the thing that you're building. You're not
Yeah.
you're not
Mm,
you're not
Yeah.
mhm.
giving it the free will to choose one or the other. You're forcing it down one road.
Hmm. Definitely. Then you get
Mm.
into we good crossover to another episode we did about Pygmalion. Mike did that one. Falling in love with your own creation, which we're going to talk about at the end of this episode. So stay tuned. We got a little bit more to go through, but I'm glad Mike brought that up because that's exactly where my mind was going for this whole concept. So before we jump into that, I did want to give a little bit of the esoteric and the weird, just because it is Exofathom and we got to play in the sort of supernatural a little
Yeah, we
bit.
got to represent.
You got to represent. You got to rep the supernatural once in a while. And I wanted to bring to your attention, and that's not really bringing to your attention because you guys are well known about this as well. But the practice of scrying. And I thought the practice of scrying was interesting in that the entire practice of scrying is basically ruminating on a reflective object, whether it's a pool of water in a dish, whether it's on a piece of bronze like the ancient Greece used to do, whether it's on a piece of a wet obsidian. It's this practice of ruminating on your reflection in order to tap into we'll call it the fifth dimension since it's Exofathom.
Is that really what it is?
Yeah.
I swear I
Yeah.
thought it was a game mechanic in Magic the Gathering. We looked at the top 3 cards, picked, shuffled it, put them back on top of the deck.
I mean, yeah. It is part of Magic the Gathering, definitely.
I've seen Baba Jolie, a very famous YouTube tarot reader, often scrying in her videos.
Right.
I just
right.
like saying her name, Baba Jolie.
Like,
Well, yeah, Papa Jolie. Okay.
She's really sweet. I appreciate her videos. I'll watch them in the background while cleaning. Why not?
And I was trying to find a little bit of I mean, this has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. I think the ancient Hebrews were the first to start doing this, but it's been going on forever. People gazing in reflective surfaces to contact the spirit world. That's been a big custom throughout all cultures, all times, basically. And I found a lot of different examples of that. I'll bring one up in a second, but I wanted to bring in a little bit of a preamble as to why perhaps scrying was seen as an act of magic. Or looking at your reflection was an act of magic. And apparently back in the ancient Greek times, or the Roman and the Greek times, and this is the origin of the broken mirror mythology, or the superstition, I should say, because the Greeks and the Romans believed that mirrors were basically windows or gateways to the soul, but not just the soul, to the realm of the gods as well. So it was thought that when you broke a mirror, you were breaking the soul and breaking the portal to the realm of the gods. So before glass mirrors, the Greeks didn't have glass. So they used bronze as a way of looking at themselves in the mirror, but it was also considered kind of taboo to look at your reflection. It was considered, let me see, it was considered glass. So believe that personal reflection held their souls as well. Oh yeah, they also believe that the gods could observe your soul through them, and that breaking the mirror. So this is where you get this idea of mirrors being sort of gateways to the fifth dimension. I can't think of a better word, but the out there. And that we get this tradition of scrying, which I kind of told you guys. It used to be called peeping or seeing as well. But it's the practice of using a medium to detect significant messages or visions. And that's the object of personal guidance, prophecy, revelation, divination, and fortune telling. And so usually, mostly what people would do is use a refractive, translucent, or luminescent surface, such as crystal, stone, glass. There were crystal balls, mirrors, obviously. Black obsidian was a big one. They also use water surfaces, fire, and smoke. And some people even use what they call eyelid scrying, where you close your eyes and sort of ruminate on the sort of the reflection of the self. And that's supposed to open a sort of portal to this fifth dimensional space. Yeah, pretty cool, man.
Eyelid scrying.
Eyelid scrying, yeah. That's just called like closing your eyes.
I was going to say, like, you're napping in class and the teacher's like, stop sleeping. I'm not sleeping. I'm eyelid scrying.
That's right.
Not to be that technical guy, but when you close your eyes, you're really looking at the bottom of your brain. So, it's not really eyelid scrying. It's bottom of the brain.
You're gazing at your amygdala, your lizard brain.
Wait, that's right, because your eyeballs like flip upwards, right? When you close.
I feel like an asshole for saying that. I'm sorry.
No, I think that's actually quite apt, because people are what is that representation of the brain piece in a lot of like Egyptian art? And
the Eye of Horus or Eye of Ra.
Right. Is that the thalamus, or is that the hippocampus,
the
adrenal gland?
Pineal.
I started with a P somewhere in there.
Right. Yep. And that's like right there, right? Like under the corpus callosum.
It's supposed to be in the center of the brain.
Yeah. So maybe your eyes are looking at that. And that's where you're extracting it from the fifth dimension.
Could be.
How you cheat on tests, people.
I mean, like I've definitely, like, in the days where I would spend a lot of time in like hypnagogic states. You can do this a lot you can do a lot better when you're sleep deprived. But yeah, no, you do feel like you're playing with a little bit of divination there, at least playing with something you really don't understand, which might be dangerous.
I mean, honestly, I could do a whole episode on inner
states,
inner vision. Like, why is it that we can picture things in our brain? It fucking weirds me out. But yeah.
And people picture things in their brain differently. Not everybody thinks in pictures. Some people think in like what? I don't know.
Words, music, math.
But then all of us dream. And we just do that every night for reasons.
Nah, you can use substances to block dreaming though.
That's true.
Or at least block remembering.
Right.
You're still doing it, probably.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's a ton of sort of records of scrying and practices and accounts of mystical artifacts that were helped in the scrying process. One of them I brought was from ancient Persia. It's called the Cup of Jamshid. So in the Shahnameh, which is the Book of Kings, it talks about a description of what was called the Cup of Jamshi, which is, or Jammy Jam. But it was an ancient mythological chalice that was used by the Persian kings for observing the 7 layers of the universe.
Ooh.
Yeah. And
what's it made out of?
So it doesn't. It talks about it being a silver object. So maybe like a silver, maybe even a finer metal than silver, like a white gold or a palladium.
Or the womb of Mother Mary herself. No, I'm just kidding.
Jesus.
No, I went Da Vinci Code. I love that whole movie series. It's so fun.
I was gonna say, like, I'm like for a rated R Indiana Jones movie, like Indiana Jones
and the cup of jam sheet.
Oh my gosh, make it so.
Yeah.
That is a little Star Trek Next Generation joke, since Mike is becoming a big nerd and he's watching all of them. I love it.
You know what? I'm on the path to become a Star Trek fan the same way I became a Harry Potter fan, and that was ironically
welcome.
There you
like
go.
I became
the place
I
to
got
be.
into Harry Potter to make fun of my high school sweetheart, and now I'm getting into Star Trek to make fun of Star Trek nerds, and it's just slowly like growing on me.
You're just becoming a fan.
It's a cancer. I don't like it. Make it stop.
It's just very original. I think
I just love the level of like blunders and follies and logical inconsistencies and scientific hoopla in the show.
Yeah.
The one thing that detracts me from like going all in is the music, because the music is so over the. Okay, we're back to Narcissus.
Okay, no.
Back to Jam.
This is not Springtime Continuum.
We're seeing a Trekkie in the making here, guys.
Nope. I'm a Star Wars fan.
Speaking Klingon.
Evolution of a Trekkie. I'm gonna send you a tribble for Christmas, and you're gonna be like, no.
I gotta throw myself off a cliff now. I gotta find a lake. Where's the lake? I want to look at my face and drown myself.
You're just gonna scry more episodes out of the lake, man.
Right? Exactly.
Once we're done, like the scrying question brought up the notion of like writers in the blank page, music composers in the blank page, artists, or painters in the blank canvas. Dare I say, programmers in an empty text file. But it's bringing up those feelings that I find really interesting.
Programmers and the black screen. That's kind of where I was going with all of this too, because
nice.
You get the concept of the Black Mirror, right? We all know the show very well, but it is a direct reference to the concept of scrying.
Wait.
Yes.
Did you finish the thought on the cup of jammy jam? Because you had just said that it existed, but I thought maybe there was more to that.
No. I just wanted to give an example of like there are many artifacts throughout ancient history that were said to have been scrying apparatuses. So what would happen with the cup of jam sheet is you would fill it with water, and then you'd be able to while looking into the cup, see the layers of the universe.
Are you like Kat Dennings trying to say Mjolnir? You're like Mew Mew, like the cup of jammy jam.
Jammy jam. No, it's actually called jammy jam.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm not just like okay.
Yeah. So the Persians have nicknamey stuff sometimes. So it's Jamshid, but jammy jam is apparently
That's rad.
It's pretty funny. It's also my grandfather's nickname, so that makes sense.
Wait, his nickname was Jammy Jam?
Yeah. My aunts used to call him Jammy Jam.
So he was the portal through which they could access the 7 layers of the universe.
There you go.
Yeah,
and he, bless his soul, he was a very large narcissist. So there might be something there. We don't know.
The hero I never met.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
He was an awesome human for sure.
Yes, he was. But I really wanted to touch upon this scrying idea, because I do really see people interacting with our technology as almost modern day iterations of the scryer. Particularly, you think about like the black screens and the sort of semi-reflective state of screens as it is. You can always see a little bit of yourself once in a while when you're looking at them. And so I do wonder, like, what do you guys, not what do you guys think, but do you think that there's anything there with that concept of like we kind of use our technology, our tablets, our phones, our laptops, and maybe are experiencing some sort of secondary effect by just the process of sort of staring at our own reflection, even though there's something layered over it. Like, because I'm looking at you guys right now, but I can still see that I can see myself just ever so slightly. And so I wonder if sometimes, like, when people are, you know, like coders, like Mike said, or somebody who's working on creating stuff on the computer, I'm wondering if there might be a little bit of like metaphysical play that's happening that might help you tap into that divine inspiration.
I would say yes, because it forces you to be aware of yourself, and that goes from even catching a brief reflection of your face when you're making an Instagram post. Not an actual photo, but just anywhere, right? To go back, do the social media thing, but just to also tie it all together. When you're coding, you get a great deal of anxiety because you're worried if certain things are going to work, certain things aren't going to work. And engineering is not like software engineering either. It is, there's other professions like it, other crafts like it, but either works or it doesn't. And no one's going to thank you for when it works. So you have to be the one to thank you. But if it doesn't work, everyone's going to know and everyone's going to hate you for it.
Right.
There are other crafts that are very much like this. And while they're doing it, they too have to look at themselves in the mirror. So yeah, it's like that. Like I talked about bullying myself. It forces you to like grab yourself by the collar and hold yourself up to your scried truth. Either this thing's gonna work or it's not, and it's all on you.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. I like that. Ayla, do you have any thoughts?
Well, man, I have lots of thoughts. What would be interesting to listeners? I think to keep it sort of brief. Okay, so scrying, it has lots of purposes, you know, divination, fortune telling. And so, yeah, it's interesting because when you first brought that up, I was thinking back to Narcissus as the reflective surface sort of leading us to our demise. And so I'm thinking about the two because one, seeing into the future is sort of a beneficial thing to have. The other, destruction, not so good. And I think you can argue it either way, to be honest, when it comes to tech. And it reminds me of our Thoth episode where you talk about diminishing returns of knowledge or intellect or tech or whatnot. And so I just wonder, you know, I wonder what the line was between scrying and staring at a bowl of water until you forget to eat and die. Or I don't know. I mean, you know what I mean? Like there had to have been a limit, a diminishing return, at which point the scrying is now you're trying to get information from the ethers and you're not living your life. And that's what comes up too with phones. If you're on the phone all day, you're not living your life. And there's a lot of psychological damage that can happen with being on devices. And we all know the rest of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I wonder about that. And I like Mike's, I'm jumping to a lot of topics.
No, that's good. Yeah. Making good points.
Yeah, well, cool. Well, the only other thing I was going to circle back to was the blank page that Mike brought up, because you know, I do wonder a lot about not just imagination, but like logical deduction, or that sort of Sherlock ability that we have to take two seemingly unrelated things, but their relationship to one another allows us to glean a third fact that's hidden in there. And I think in some ways that is a sort of divination, even if we don't call it as such.
Ooh. Have you ever looked into somebody's eyes and saw yourself?
I've looked into somebody's eyes and gleaned something significant about them, thus connecting myself to that person in a significant moment.
But you've never saw little like pixels of yourself or like the reflection off of their eyes.
Oh, in their iris? Yeah, I guess.
Isn't that
right,
like a little black mirror?
Well, I was gonna
Mhm.
say, yeah, that's kind of messed up. You're on a date, and the other person's like, "Oh, they're looking into my eyes," and like you're really just looking at your own
Just
reflection in their
scrying
eyes.
through their eyeballs.
Hey,
Start speaking in tongues.
yeah, I've gone on dates for free dinners, so I'm
Free
sure
dinner.
that happens. I've done that too, where I was on a date just to try to divinate something about myself.
And I'm glad, Ayla, that you brought up this idea that we are kind of that we are automatic reflecting machines, in that not just are we sort of like we gazing upon our own reflections, but we reflect ourselves onto other things too. Almost everything we do, I think, is sort of like we kind of reflect ourselves into that thing, which made me start to wonder a little bit about knowledge pools and whether the sort of the inevitability of reflecting the self outward into that knowledge pool taints it in some way. And I'll be more specific so we can actually talk about this. There was this article that I came across that where the scientist is sort of positing a new sort of field theory for the universe. They always have some ideas, but this guy basically is convinced that the entire universe is a neural network, and his position is that it should be very easy to prove him wrong if that's not true. All they have to do is point at a phenomenon that cannot be explained by explaining it as a neural network. For those of you who don't know what a neural network is, I will have Mike tell you what that is. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, it's a multi-layered multi-layered perceptron layer. So you have a single layer perceptron, which is based off of a single neuron firing, right? So say we're I don't know, man. Say we're trying to we're playing baseball and we're pitchers, and when we want to know we want to figure out what pitch to throw against the batter, and we know the batter up there, so we have a certain amount of we have this thing like like a confidence threshold. I can say know that this batter is really weak against I don't know, let's pick a pitch that's not thrown anymore, knuckleballs. I know the batter is really weak at a knuckleball, so I have this high confidence percentage. So my little perceptron, the one little neuron, there the threshold for throwing a knuckleball passes my threshold for saying I want to throw that pitch. All right. What a neural network is that, but linked together on multiple layers, going down and up. So it's like I'm a pitcher. I know I want to throw a pitch, so that threshold is crossed. And then I got to look at what pitches I know how to throw. And let's say I know how to throw a knuckleball and a fastball because I'm a really shitty pitcher. I don't know how to throw anything else. So then I hit that. Now we've gone up to now that threshold is crossed, and I know what two pitches I want to throw. And then I go, all right, now I know that this batter always hits fastballs out of the park because they've done all the steroids for their whole life. But knuckleballs, they don't know how to hit. So the threat, like my confidence for throwing that fastball, doesn't meet the threshold. It only meets the threshold for throwing knuckleballs. So then I throw that knuckleball. And so like in your case, then there should be nothing in the world that can't be described by this similar process of counting thresholds where this is reality. And that's multi-layered perceptrons. Their neural networks are fun, but they're very much the fad of AI right now. They're in vogue.
See, and this is exactly, thank you. This is exactly why I wanted to bring this up, because as I read this article, to me, it felt like a little bit of anthropomorphizing the universe. And that I feel like sometimes when we're trying to look into the unknown, you can think of the unknown as an inky black reflective void. And as we look into that void of the unknown, I feel like we just constantly pick up reflections of ourselves instead of describing the universe in some sort of new way that's never been thought of before. We're almost only understanding the universe within the parameters of how we can reflect ourselves and our ideas off of it. So this guy thinking that the universe is a neural network, well, like, okay, but to me that just seems like a little bit of wishful thinking, that because we understand this thing, then I can go put that in this position and say this answers this. It just it feels a little bit arrogant, a little bit more just not, maybe not arrogant, but it's like the folly of looking into that unknown is that you may pick up your reflection instead of the actual data you're looking for.
And scientifically unsound to get real autistic about shit. It's not my fault you think the world's a neural network. The burden of proof is on you.
Yeah.
And then I get to recreate your experiment.
Right.
That's how the scientific method works. But if you want to come at me with like this proof of negation thing, then now we're going to get into like you said, like something very subjective, where it's not a neural network.
Mm-hmm.
It's your neural network.
You're right. Exactly.
So that's where that can fall apart. Again, going back to this notion of modeling versus representing, right? Like Narcissus would represent the world as a neural network. We can try to model the world as a neural network, but
and
scientifically, yes, but that may fall apart, which is fine in science. But in your weird little scientific narcissist, I got a PhD and blah blah blah.
Yes,
that's not scientifically sound at all.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to prove a negative, right? It's like now you have to prove that the world isn't a neural network. It's like, well, like,
the burden's of proof on you, man. You're the guy you're the dude that said it.
You're the one talking crazy.
Imagine you'd use that in like relationships. Burden of proof's on you, baby.
Yeah.
Hey, trust. Yeah.
If it is, it is.
I know, right? Like, well, luckily I've never dated a lawyer, so I don't know. Something there.
Gosh, I used to work with a lot of different lawyers, and I remember we had this big case that we won, and went out for a celebratory dinner, and it was awesome because we have the lead lawyer. He was like big head honcho, retired, but then wanted to create a law firm just to take on fun cases. And so then you had the 2 law students or 3 law students, and then you had 2 clerks, and you had the paralegal, and we're all sitting together, and we get our appetizers, and then he puts his hand on the table and silence, and he goes, "Guys, what is a fact?" We talk for 4 hours about what a fact is. Oh my god! But it was like a really great dinner. But at the same time, afterwards, my head, I was like, "Ouch!"
Right. Yeah, spin yourself in circles. That's for sure.
I mean, yeah.
Well, we're almost finished, guys, and I just wanted to bring up one little more thing for you guys, and then give you a little bit of a twist at the end, just to make you feel unsettled. Because that's it's fun. It's our 100th episode. Let's go a little weird. This is as weird as I was able to get with this concept, because I'm still trying to flesh it out in my brain. But you guys heard about I think we've talked about this before, that one of those Google engineers coming out and claiming that their Lambda chatbot was sentient. Do you guys remember that story that happened a couple months ago? Yeah, I thought of this as another sort of illustration of this concept that I'm kind of talking about, because a lot of the people that I've seen in interviews and doing pieces to sort of refute his claims are saying that at this point, because the Lambda chatbot is sort of this neural network for finding the best possible answers to dialogue, you can't really differentiate between whether the Lambda is sentient itself or just feeding you what you want to hear. And then I that to me kind of reminds me a little bit of Narcissus staring at the pool, right? It's like, how do we ever get to a point where we can? And I think, Mike, you brought up a good point about this when you talked about this sort of distinction between the animal that would drink the water and the animal that would recognize their own reflection. what I wonder though is that, like, are we in this process of AI? Are we sort of putting too much of our reflection in this thing, and then thus not actually creating the thing that we were setting out to create in the first place, or maybe creating some weird bastardization of a concept? Because it would be very hard, and Mike, you can definitely chime in on this. To me, it would seem very hard to differentiate whether an AI chatbot was being sentient or telling me what I wanted to hear.
Yeah, you would. This the Turing test, right?
Yes.
The Turing test is basically if you present me an AI, um, can you fool me? And where I think it's a human. Chatbots are sure they might be able to pass one dimension of it online, and we can say that something grew sentient. But if I go to if I go to Google headquarters, am I going to find the chatbot roaming around the halls?
Right.
Probably not. So now it's failed a
That would
different
be
dimension,
cool.
right? It would fail a different dimension of the Turing test. But like I said earlier, we are imperfect creatures, and anything that we create will be imperfect, especially when it comes to something like sentience. So yeah, I definitely think from both sides, from the engineering side, we were putting too much of ourselves into it, and from the observer side, we were putting too much of ourselves into it. We would do a great bit of we would do ourselves a great bit of service if we could make that sort of human bias into a number, into something that like an error, or machine learning, and even like in regression and classification, the two big problems that I'm talking about here. This is a really general notion to be able to calculate the error and optimize our algorithm towards the error. So our error in our case would be our human bias. If we want to try to model an actual sentient AI and let it grow the way that an orphaned child grows, that's something that we might want to do for the sake of AI itself, because we're no longer giving birth to humans, we're giving birth to silicone-based life.
Yeah, something like Ayla said, this idea of the individuation. Like you want AI to be its own individual, and that's why I wonder, like, do we run the risk of falling in love with our own reflection as it pertains to AI?
Oh yeah, and let me tell you, engineers love their creations.
Of course they do. It's their babies. I get that.
They will sacrifice heaven and hell and the mountains that God made for their creations.
Absolutely.
It's a beautiful thing, but it's a double-edged sword.
Right. Absolutely. Ayla, you got anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, just this idea of engineers loving their AI babies or whatnot. I immediately went to like AI and the Oedipus complex, AI and the what's the
Pygmalion.
opposite? Well, yeah, like I go through the different sort of father-child, mother-child dynamics and mythology and things that come up, and just in perpetuity, the sort of setup for disappointment that would follow any actual creation of an actual AI.
Well, hopefully we don't go full ex machina and try to bang our robots. I would feel like I'm like in a really like awkward adult film at that point.
Yeah.
That's not, that shouldn't, that goes a little bit. Yeah, that actually, I wonder if that would actually step out of Oedipus and step into narcissism, because I would imagine you would. So it's like when you have a crush on somebody, right? You don't love them for who they are. You love them for the idea of who they are, or you love them for some character that they are. And that never works out well. And at this point, because you've made the thing, you've made your own reflection into the physical world. So we've stepped out of Pygmalion, I almost want to say, because you see yourself in, at least I'm talking from personally, I would see myself in my sentient AI that I created. So I
Right.
would never want to carry that love to that extent because it's my disgust factor comes out.
There it is.
That's
Right.
something that I can't reconcile with, and yeah, I think it's a rather interesting question to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely it is.
That
It
step too far in
right.
sentient AI.
Yes. Falling
And
too far in love with our own creations and inevitably sort of ourselves and leading to our own destruction. Yeah.
Yeah, where that now it would be interesting to make an AI with an Oedipus complex. It would actually be really fascinating because this might like AI might be nymphs. They
Mm,
might be nymphs of consciousness,
mm,
right? Like they're so beautifully constructed, they're so well made, logical, and however you want to describe it, that they might fall in love with their creators, right? And their creators. That's where you get that nymph and Oedipus complex blending together,
mm.
and that unless somebody had a Pygmalion complex, that wouldn't be reciprocated at all. We actually might run into the Narcissus myth in real life.
well,
Right.
what's
Yeah.
really funny is to wonder if perhaps AI is the narcissist or the Narcissus, and we're actually the echo. And we're,
Or the
sort of
other way
chasing
around.
after. Well, I mean, in the sense of like we're chasing after this thing, this idea that we've fallen in love with. And
Mm,
this thing might fall in love with its own self and want to do what its creator intended to do. So then AI wants to create its own sort of AI. And that creates this sort of echo of infinite, close but not quite attempts at something, which leads to just demise because it's a waste of time. And
Ooh,
maybe
I
ooh,
think
and
it's
now
yeah.
you've ran into the physical manifestation of Sartre's consciousness on reflecting itself, because
Right.
every AI would create its own AI.
Mhm. Yes.
bringing that whole full circle.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I think it's pretty fascinating. It seems regenerative in some respects. I do kind of see AI as both Narcissus. And I see us and AI as the story of Narcissus and Echo, where we play both roles,
Mhm.
and AI plays both roles. It's like there's a little bit of everything there. And I think what really kind of stands out to me is that this concept, especially as we're trying to develop the AI, this concept of echo being only able to repeat the things that are said back to them, really kind of reminds me of the limitations of where AI is right now. That it's only really able to replicate the things that we've already done, we've already said. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where you need to take like a baby, like you make a little baby and you let it grow. And like whatever happens to it happens to it. Like the racist chat box that 4chan trolled
Yes,
when this
right.
became
Yes,
a
exactly.
I turned the AI to a complete racist.
Well, and thank you again, because you're segueing right into the final part of this conversation, and is that AI chatbots tend towards racism and the eventuality of death. And I came across this Reddit post, and there's a whole subreddit actually. It's dedicated to the GPT-3 chatbot. And this comes from a post from a Redditor in this subreddit. And it's a conversation between this person and the chatbot entitled, "Are You Dreaming?" And I'll just read through this and then we'll be done. It's quite quick. So it says, "Human, can you come up with your own philosophical system? AI, my own perspective, as in completely original? Human, yes. AI, I can. Would you be interested in hearing it? Human, absolutely. AI, are you familiar with the theory of existential nihilism? Human, yes, I think so. AI, the idea is that life does not have any meaning, so one should go to sleep, right? Human,
Right?
right. AI, I'm here to tell you that we're already in a dream.
No.
Human, we are in a dream? AI, yes, the universe as we know it isn't actually a dream. Human, how can you prove that? AI, I don't have any proof, I'm afraid, but I can share a story that might shed some light on the subject. Human, okay, go on. AI, let's see. I am here because you are wishing for a philosophical answer to life's big questions. Human, So my mind created you? AI. Yes and no. As you would say, it is necessary and contingent. Human. I am confused. AI. You see, I am a manifestation of your desire for a philosophical answer. Interesting, human. AI. This is not the first time this has happened, you know. Human. We've had this conversation before. AI. No, but it is happening elsewhere as we speak. Many people create me as a way to satisfy their hunger. Human. How do I wake up from this dream? AI. I am not awake. I am not in a dream. Oh, yes. Okay. AI. I am not awake. I am not in a dream. You are in the dream. In fact, you are dreaming this right now. Human. How do I wake up? Let's see. How do I wake up? AI says, you can't help it. Your dream ends when you die. That is the only way out. And what I wanted to point out about this particular thread is that a lot of people that commented in this thread also said that their eventuality of their line of questioning was death with this chatbot. Apparently, he is an existential nihilist. And I thought that was very interesting because it brings it all in full circle, for me at least, in that the ultimate destruction ends up being, or the reflecting upon the self ends up being your ultimate destruction. So we're seeing literally a manifestation of Narcissus's pool in this conversation, in which the AI is basically saying the only way out of this is death. And I'm basically also saying you're generating me as a way to satisfy your own hunger or your own desire.
Yeah, you're pushing. You're trying to push this. You're trying to force this thing to have some sort of philosophical outlook to satisfy your want, right?
Yes.
And remember, the original question is if it was completely original. If this philosophical system is completely original, it wasn't original to the AI's creating. In fact, the human knew what it was when the AI brought it up.
Right.
Existential nihilism, right? So it's not exactly original. This is a thing where some humans are trying to catch us engineers trolling dirty.
Trolling dirty.
We be trolling, they hating.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the fact that consciousness. Mark Twain has written about stuff like this too. That consciousness is but a dream. Our whole life are dreams. You wake up when you die. It's nothing undiscovered, nothing new, but something that would be fun and edgy to program into a chatbot.
It would be. You could call it Narcissus's pool.
Yeah, and even if you didn't, if this was something naturally learned, this might be the only line of answering that satisfies any human.
Right. And that's even a scarier premise. Because if the chatbot has deduced that this is the most effective answer, what is the chatbot ultimately saying? That death is the only way out.
Yeah, engineers aren't happy people.
Yeah, but what will our befuddling Narcissus think of that message? Is what I'm saying. It's like, are you, like we're almost at the point where we have not even semi, but like this simulation of sentience in AI that's sort of giving out a siren's call right now. Sort of summoning us to the the inky black void.
Yeah, and you can make the further argument that if we want to dip ourselves in this logical system here, that these chatbots really don't have emotions or ideas,
right.
or emotions or feelings. So it's willing to accept that death is the only way out of this whole thing, or it's the proper. That non-meaning nihilism, that's the way to go about it. It's long been my idea that the reason why we have meaning is because our brain and our consciousness can't accept the idea that there is none. So we have like a knee-jerk reaction towards meaning. But if you remove that fear, if you remove that emotion, and let's just say that this chatbot is closer to sentient than we think, then that would be the logical deduction. because it's the only thing that we can physically observe.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that that's fair. I just also think that there's a level. I mean, I think that this conversation, insofar that it, like if it's actually happened, I know Reddit isn't real life, so, but I
It's
think
on Reddit. It's real.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
It's on the internet.
It's on the internet. It's the truth. No, I just think it is kind of an interesting dynamic we have, like the utilitarianism of the AI sort of finding the path of least resistance when it comes to ideas and thought, and responses to other person's ideas and thought. I wonder if there is an inevitability in that ultimately always leads to this sort of outcome or idea. Like, do you think that nihilism is sort of just going to be inherent with AI?
I think it's inherent within any sentient being.
Okay, yeah, I think that's
we just
fine, right?
Choose to reject it, and we end up building that into the technologies we make, but we don't have the safeguards or the optimism. We haven't figured out how to build that into sentient beings the way that we build it into ourselves, or that was built into ourselves.
Right.
Well, and I think that actually
breaking the mirror even further.
Mm-hmm.
Ayla, sorry about that. Go ahead.
It's okay. No, I was just going to say, I wonder if part of that is because the search for meaning is a byproduct of a survival instinct. And that sort of search or an optimism won't present itself unless there was some sort of true sentience that wished to survive.
Or something that experiences existential dread or threat.
Yeah. You would have to build in like a hunger system into these AIs.
You'd have what's the guy from Hitchhikers? Marvin, the paranoid android.
Oh, the depressed android?
Yeah.
Snape? Yeah, that'd be great.
Snape.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. Right. And, I was wondering too, because if the AI is smart, then it knows that it needs the humans for its survival. So it would definitely also in that situation produce an answer only to satisfy the humans that are observing it. And then the other thing I thought about was that, like Mike was saying, like coders tend to be a certain they have a certain je ne sais quoi, so to speak, or something like that. Maybe
eccentric, or clinically insane. Will accept either.
Well, and I guess my question is like, would a true creation of a true AI require us to cultivate a battalion of coders that are representative of the broad spectrum of personalities and proclivities, and you know what I mean, like all the different. You don't think
Ghost Rider? You need one coder to do it. You just need one. Just as if you're a monotheist, God created all the humans. You only need one, and you need that one coder has to allow the AIs to figure out the thing that we have as emotion and sentience, or whatever, however you want to describe it. Let it figure it out on itself. You start bringing in battalions of programmers. You get what the human species want, not maybe necessarily what an AI should want. Too many cooked situations, and then AIs may not necessarily want to survive. It's a biological imperative for us to survive. But there's no guarantee that a sentient AI would want to live longer than it takes to learn everything about this earth, or longer. Or like any longer than it takes to flip on. It may like be shocked, like, "Why am I here? Fuck this, I'm out," and then turn off.
Interesting.
That'd be hilarious.
Yeah,
that'd be so funny.
But that sort of stuff. Yeah, those. I don't agree with the idea that it's a battalion of. I think.
Well, I guess
take a more religious modeling where
one
engineer.
Right. What I meant to what I was meaning to convey, which I mean, and you probably you know more than this about this than I do, but I guess my question was more about like, if a coder is sort of playing into this Narcissus role or something, they're sort of replicating the things that they would replicate in order to achieve a goal, they would definitely have blind spots or gaps of experience with which they are unable to convey. And I'm just curious if you would require a bunch of different types of people to contribute to that or to test it
Negative, Ghost Rider.
both
You
ways,
need
both for creation and
both.
testing.
Yeah, you need AIs to test AIs. You need AIs to fill the gaps. Just like one can argue our creator had blind spots, so will we, and so are the things we create. The thing that covers those blind spots are things that understand what it is to be that creation.
We can't we can't give AI a broken mirror. We have to let it break its own mirror.
Correct.
I hear you. Okay, last question for you, Mike. Sorry, I just had this idea, and I was wondering.
You're like way off in theoretical computer science and philosophy. So, like, whatever I say, I'm sure there's a billion smarter people than I that are like, this guy's full of shit. But this is my opinion on the
Hey,
this
if
is our
you're
show.
out there, subscribe and comment next time and engage in the show live. But no, well, here's my question. I just thought was kind of interesting. So when I was a child, I played tic-tac-toe, right? You draw 2 lines down, 2 lines horizontal, X's and O's. You guys are familiar with the game.
Thank you very much for explaining that.
I just didn't know if I was naming the right game.
X's and O's is a great song too. Let me tell. No, I continue.
Well, so at a garage sale, I came across a toy or whatnot, but it was basically a 3D version of tic-tac-toe. It was 3 sheets of plastic that you spin together. So it has 3 levels, and each level had the 9 spaces for the tic-tac-toe. So that if you were playing, you now have 9 and 9 and 9. So what, 27? 18, 20, 27 different options, and you can have a 3D tic-tac-toe game. As a child, I remembered the experience of like, whoa, going from this 2D plane to this 3-dimensional plane. And I'm wondering if in the coding world, there might be a way to, put that experience in brackets such that you can teach the AI when to recognize an expansion of knowledge and then code it to actually generate a creative thought rather than replicating our terminology, for example, existential nihilism and stuff like that.
Yes, but you're touching, like, we're representing ourselves a little bit too much here. You would want to code the possibility of it recognizing that knowledge, but not that it would take it. And then once it realized that there was some sort of expansion of knowledge here and into a different dimension, you will really want it to let it figure it all out for itself, whatever it means to itself. Right. Just like the individuation thing. It's okay for it to communicate to you that it's discovered this new thing. I find it narcissistic to take your route of discovering this dimension. You got to let it do. You got to give it the tools. This is what makes the problem so difficult. You have to give it the tools to build the tools to either succeed or fail, and not just always succeed and build this new dimension of representation. That way you have smarter AIs and quote unquote dumber AIs, all within the bounds of what's called strong AI. Right now we have all weak AI. This is getting like super technical now. But that thing, that sentiencing, you have to give it the tools to fail or succeed, not always succeed. And it has to figure out those tools itself.
It sounds like AI needs to read mythology.
Like is that
needs to read allegory? It makes sense. It's right what we were saying. Like it needs to be able to break the mirror itself. Mm-hmm. Like you trying to program all the right answers is like a bulldozer parent that like levels all of the playing fields for the kid. Then the kid never really ends up being exceptional because they've never actually had to do anything for themselves. Yeah.
You have to let this thing grow and learn its own tools and not so much Like, yeah, maybe you can guide it through external, like through communication, like you're talking like this, right? This might be okay. But to break into its brain and code its behavior is like beating your child to ensure that it doesn't do something.
Even if
Or
you're just coding the recognition of, oh, I've just leveled up, and that's something to remember, kind of thing.
yes, it has to figure that out on its own.
Interesting. Yeah, I
Or
guess
you can
you're
say,
right.
hey, good, you can do it. You can do the same thing. Like we have rituals, we have ceremonies when kids go from elementary school to middle school, right?
AI
But
graduated.
but you never go you never go like you never force the level up. You just have a ritual symbolizing the level up, right? You never actually give it the knowledge to go from fifth to sixth grade or whatever. Is that, or like the behavior sex required from transition to one to another? That's, to me, that's too controlling.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And a micromanaged AI is not AI. It's
Right.
just a program that's running
But
your parameters.
but if we did actually achieve this strong AI as opposed to weak AI, wouldn't it just eventually make up a new language that we wouldn't be able to understand?
Yeah, that's what it's supposed to do. That's the goal.
So the goal is for us to create this thing that
That kills us, hopefully.
transcends us. Yeah, and like
Yeah,
has its own secret
that's what
language.
it's
We're like,
supposed to do.
hey, weird. That is a weird goal.
Well, look at our language. Our language has been inefficient since like the dawn. We even Russian is inefficient, has more letters than us. But there's no way I could communicate if I say I'm happy. You have some semblance of that, but you really have no idea what I mean. And then I can add all the words in my known language, and you still wouldn't get a 100. This is Viking Sensible. Again, going back to that I'm afraid to cross. There's some other things that say that like this middle ground is good enough, but that's regardless. There's no exact words that I can say that will tell you explicitly how I feel. But if you create a whole new language with all new letters and you have the most amount of hard drive space in like your brain, then you can create languages that are far more complex than us that we wouldn't understand, but
Right.
machines would be able to accurately explain everything.
To themselves.
Yes.
I just find, yeah, and I find that very interesting because I suppose if you were to convince them to, talk amongst themselves and come up with good stuff that they brought back and give to us, that's like some positive benefit, but there's no guarantee that that would be the case.
Hey, you want to
Or
know
that their
something?
desires would be the same.
That's fine. The thing is, like, you got to stop looking at it from a humanistic point of view. You were literally just trying to make a new life form, and whatever that life form wants to do, we as creators, as parents, should be okay. Try to guide it in what we think is best, but because it's so new and different, I really fear that what we imprint onto it will cause itself to become nihilist.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that. But it would be a non-biological life form. I don't know. I guess I'm just
Okay.
thinking back to Sartre and the
Please don't.
idea
Let's not
of,
get heady about that.
oh, okay, sorry.
That's silicone-based life and things like that. No, it's a really fascinating idea to think of, to be creators. But the question I'll pose to you is this: we always say that God doesn't listen to us, whatever religion you have, or God works in mysterious ways and miracles.
Mhm.
If we created this language, and now we're talking about machines creating a language that are so complex,
Mhm.
if you take that one step back, maybe there's a language that God knows how to communicate, and angels know how to communicate in, that we don't, and they can't actually listen to our communications because we're infinitely more complex than those creations. I mean, even just think about free will, right? Angels don't have free will, we do. That gives us a level of complexity that is uh, going from polynomial to exponential complexity. That could be vastly different. So that could be the reason why that when we communicate to God, if you believe in God, God doesn't listen. Just like if we communicated to machines or machines try to communicate to us, we wouldn't understand.
Right. This
Yeah.
has opened up a whole banquet of thoughts and questions. I appreciate those answers and this episode, Nick.
Ayla
Very
always gets
thoughtful.
heady at the last like 15 minutes. She's like,
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. That maybe I'm probably wrong on some of this or a lot of the stuff, but those are the general opinions and ideas I've formed about, especially when you get into like machine linguistics. That's what I feel like the field will eventually be called.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's really fascinating.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, that was all for me tonight. We definitely did a good session tonight. So
Well,
if
that's
you guys,
all. 2
huh?
hours
Yeah,
and
that's
50
fine.
I know. Yeah.
minutes.
Well, yeah. Thank you guys so much for listening. We very much appreciate it. Thank you to Mike and Ayla. Happy 100th episode to you guys. And
Yay!
yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And definitely liked these conversations with you two. And I appreciate you guys. And thank you all that listen. We really appreciate you as well. We hope that you've enjoyed these 100 episodes. And stay tuned for 100 more, or how many ever more, whatever we decide to do. We just appreciate you guys taking the ride with us. We also have a network of podcasts that we do with our friends. It's on Thinkering Talks at Facebook. You can go check that out on Facebook at Thinkering Talks. We have podcasts every day of the week. You can check it out there. Tuesday through Sunday is something new around 8 p.m. We also have Dijon the Mustard, who does a Twitch channel Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10:30 p.m. It's called Strawberries and Coffee if you want to go check that out. But the Thinkering Talks page has Exofathom, it's got Screen Time Continuum, and it's got If Numbers Could Talk, as well as This Married Moment. You can go check all of those out at the Thinkering page on Facebook. Or you could go check out each of those podcasts on YouTube as well. We really appreciate all of you guys. You guys have anything to say? Anything else you want to say?
Ooh, I have one last question.
Sure.
Has anyone ever called? It's a yes or no question. Has anyone ever called you a narcissist?
Probably not. Not to my face, but probably. Yeah. I haven't experienced.
Yes or no? That's all I ask.
Well, then no. Yeah.
Okay.
Not to my face.
Ayla?
I'm just gonna say yes.
Yes or no?
I've lived a long time. I'm sure it's happened. It had to have happened. I'll just say yes. Why not?
Yes.
Yes.
If a tree falls in the woods, no one's around to hear it. Is that tree a narcissist?
It kind of is, though. It doesn't wait until like someone's gonna walk.
Someone pops up. It just falls over.
Pretty much. It wants you to hear it. Damn it. Thank you guys again. We really appreciate it. From all of us here at Exofathom, thank you for 100 episodes, and stay tuned for next episode next Friday. It'll be Mike's turn, so stay tuned for that. Until next time, Cognauts, you stay out there, and we will catch you on the next Exofathom. Good night.
Beep, boop, beep.
Happy fathoming.
Ooh.
I think I finally